Hi, my name is Mark Bernard. I'm a monetary economist. In this video, I want to talk about how to think about Russians. How do we think about Russians? How should we feel about them? A lot of you obviously have already made your own mind up and have your own conceptual framework. But in this video, I want to talk just stream of consciousness, some ideas that you may use or may not, but it is a good dialogue, just a conversation. This actually has two components to it. First, I want to talk about Russian people in the context of Russian culture. And then subsequently, I want to talk about some insights that I personally have over this geopolitical event in Ukraine and Russia and how I feel about Russians and what is the attitude one might have. So if that wasn't vague enough, let's get into specifics. I've been studying Russian culture and Russian history since high school, formally, and then in college again, literature, culture, history. I've been traveling to Eastern Europe, including Russia, since the 1990s and lived in Eastern Europe much of my life, and I'm here now. My family, now I'm talking my grandparents, came from what was the Russian Empire, although they were not ethnically Russians. I'm Polish and Ukrainian. I'm actually Ukrainian, okay? A large part of me is Ukrainian, so obviously you know I want Ukraine to win 110%. I'm an American, as you can tell by my accent, born and raised. But I understand Russian culture from the inside because I'm here and I've been here much of my life. I speak Polish, which I learned later in life, but I can understand Ukrainian and Russian to a reasonable extent. 1,000 years ago, Old Slavonic, the languages were basically the same, maybe 1,500 years ago. And so the Slavic languages, you can understand. If I go to Czech Republic or Slovakia, I could pretty much get by, I'd say 90%. Go to Ukraine, and then I go to Russia, I can actually get by. So I understand Russians, Russian culture. I'm around them. I interact with them. They're in my classes and both as students and colleagues as when I teach at colleges or universities. I have a claim about Russians. This has nothing to do with the Russia of the past, the Russia of today. The claim is the communists did not do too many things well. But what they did well is eradicate religion and spirituality and any type of transcendence. And forgive me if you're out there, you're not a believer, maybe you're a material rationalist, peace and love, that's cool. But this eradication, this radical eradication across the entire, all dimensions of Russian culture made it so there was no transcendence. And Russia, in my personal opinion, and you may disagree, except for the Russians that move abroad and start to self-actualize, except for people like Constantine inside Russia. There's people on my blog that are commenting that are Russians living abroad. For the most part, if you're in that pressure cooker of this propagandized Russia, there's not a lot of transcendence there. And anybody going to the Orthodox Church in Russia or trying to actualize spirituality, it's overwhelmed by mixed messages coming from Moscow. And you're pretty much, most Russians are living, in my opinion, a pretty basic, primitive life without this great transcendence and without this great thought process. And proof of the pudding of my claim is, if this type of situation were to happen in Poland, oh my goodness, there would be revolution in the streets in a week. But it just doesn't happen in Russia. In fact, it never happens. The only way people can protest, it seems, is to get out of Russia. Then they can self-actualize a little. In contrast, the Poles, maybe they go to church, maybe they don't. Maybe it's not about that. But they're thinking in a different way. They still have this transcendence as part of the human condition, which I believe is ingrained in our evolutionary process. I believe in a complex stratification of reality. You know, just like a dog doesn't understand language and snakes don't understand, language, mathematics, a dog can't understand math. Humans, what can we understand? What is our brain limited to? I believe that we are strands of energy between heaven and earth. And the Russians, through propaganda from communism and Soviet Russia 2.0 under the current leaders, they've eradicated that transcendence and that awareness. And if they didn't, they would be protesting. So I don't have a very high opinion about the current state of Russian culture. I don't want that culture spreading around the world. That's how I feel about Russians. Every time I go see them abroad, when they're visiting from Russia, they have such bad opinions about the world. And I'm going to tell you a story and get into that, into the second part of my video. That is how to think about Russians. How should you feel about Russians? My first premise, my claim is, it's an unseen battle between good and evil. And you should not hate Russians. You should not feel anger towards Russians. Even though this invasion is the most brutal and unjust thing we are living through today, we should have no animosity. We should have only peace and love, because they're all children of God. And we want to make the world a better place. That being said, I'm going to take some ideas from my own spirituality, which is Catholicism. St. Ignatius of Loyola, if you know his history, he was a musketeer. He was a man of the world until he was almost mortally wounded on the battlefield. And in his delirium, God came to him and gave him these principles. And one of the greatest ones was active indifference. Not a normal indifference like the Russians have. They just are indifferent, passive. Oh, I'm a little person. It's an active indifference. And that means you should not prefer a rich life to a poor life, or a poor life to a rich life. You should not prefer a long life to a short life, or a short life to a long life. You should not prefer fame and people respect you to disrespect, or disrespect to fame. You should be actively indifferent. Everything you should do is for the greater glory of God, which is the service of humanity. And so I was going on an Uber ride to IKEA with my family, and the guy who picked me up was not from Ukraine. He was from another place, which is quite obvious. And he started to spew this Russian propaganda at me. He could barely speak any Polish or English, but he was just spewing it at me. I almost got out of the car. I was pretty upset. I didn't want to argue with him. First I questioned, how did he even get in here? He probably got in the EU as like, oh, I'm a refugee immigrant from political. No, but then once he's here, he's spewing all this propaganda at me, how great Russia and Moscow is and their leader is. So the active indifference. I never give anybody a bad rating or ever report anybody. But in this case, I reported him to Uber. And I hope they fry him. I reported him on multiple accounts. Active indifference. Okay, so you have to, in this case, because we want to bring his orcs and eject them from Ukraine, prevent them from spreading their ideas around the world. Because I believe it was Schopenhauer who alluded to that the world is a war of ideas. We want to stop that spread of despotism, enlighten people, enlighten minds, free the minds. And we have to fight the good fight, like Timothy says. We have to be active. We can't be indifferent. We have to be active indifference. The term indifference comes more like a chess player. As you guys know, I'm a quasi-competitive chess player. Not really, but I like to think of myself as one. And I was in a tournament. I actually swept the tournament. And there was a game in which I was extremely emotional about. And I almost did something impulsive in the game. But like Mr. Spock on Star Trek, I just yielded to the logic of the situation. And I won the game, won that component or my class of the tournament, and I was pretty happy about it. And I won every single game. So don't get swept up by emotions. Find an avenue which you can positively contribute to the world in this geopolitical struggle of Ukraine. I didn't want to do a YouTube channel for various reasons, but it just kind of happened. Okay. I just couldn't help myself. And I like to do other things. Find a way you can be actively indifferent. You can look up that principle of St. Ignatius of Loyola from the 1500s. Now, another way to look at it is simply light versus darkness. Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, that is a great mythology. I know it's not, maybe a serious mythology, but it is a serious mythology. You can't yield to the dark side emotions. You can't hate Russians. You can't resent them. There are many good ones. They're all human, all children of the same God. Aren't we all trying to save each other? But you must be actively indifferent to fight the good fight. We all have different talents, like St. Paul tells us, and you have to find that talent in a way, and just maybe it'll come to you, in which we can help eject the orcs from the beautiful land of Ukraine. So that is my claim, that the Russian culture lacks transcendence. They're dead souls, in the words of the author, Ukrainian author, Google, from 100 years ago. You should read the book if you haven't. They lack this transcendence, and because they lack it purposely through propaganda, it's easily massaged and manipulated until they're absorbed and become just basically drones or zombie-like, tools of the apparatus in Moscow. And the second component is, and every generalization is a distortion of the truth, René Descartes, is that it is an unseen battle for good and evil. Pick your philosopher, Marcus Aurelius. If a man does you wrong, teach him otherwise or blame yourself. I wouldn't go that far. I'm more the active indifference. I want to eject those orcs. Maybe if I was young and strong and single and everything, maybe I'd be on the front lines doing some sort of medical treatment or something. I would learn medicine just to be on the front lines to help the people. Find your way to be actively indifferent. Choose another principle that jives and speaks to you. It doesn't matter from what tradition. All religions are basically a language in which we express our spirituality, but they are all true to varying degrees. So that's how I think about Russians. I don't believe they transcend very well in Russia, and I don't believe that they're self-actualizing Maslow's hierarchy of needs very well in Russia. More they've become, obviously like zombie-like orcs when it comes to frontline activity, or else they'd be bringing the government down. And two, I don't hate them. I see them all as children of God. I don't resent them. But I am going to play my best game on the chessboard to see what I can do to end this in a positive way for Ukraine. So let me know your thoughts. This is more of a stream of consciousness. I like to get back into facts and data. I'm a little bit off the grid, don't have access to too much here. But let me know your thoughts on this unseen battle between good and evil. I could keep on going on, but I don't want to make this a too long video. I just believe that there's an imbalance in the universe between light and darkness, good and evil. And it's our responsibility to rise to the occasion and bring those guys down in a positive way and make the world a better place. Thank you very much. Have a great day.